To lead our discussion today, I'd like to introduce you to the session moderator, Deborah Ayers. Deb's daughter was diagnosed with a rare metabolic bone disorder as a toddler. After 10 years of vigilantly advocating for her daughter's health, wellness, and education, she helped her overcome intense psychological, emotional, and physical challenges while beginning a painful injection treatment at the age of 10. Deb and Abby co-founded the Avalon Foundation several months later, offering psycho-emotional support during critical chapters for families living with rare disease. Professionally, Deborah has been a wellness practitioner for over 25 years. She studied, certified, and licensed in over a dozen different types of healing body work and energy work. Uniquely combining her skills of the healing arts, psychology, counseling, and mindfulness, Deb shares her expertise and experience to help patient families of the Avalon Foundation. As an advocate and healer, her mission is not only to help individuals, but to also provide opportunities to society to raise awareness and build bridges of understanding and compassion toward the rare disease community and humanity as a whole. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Welcome, everybody. We're so excited to have you here. The ABCs of advocating for your child's education. This is an important topic. Recently, actually in April 2020, Springer Nature published an article that told us that the low numbers of children with rare diseases and their delay or lack of clear diagnosis are among the difficulties experienced in the pursuit of adaptations that children and teachers need to promote a healthy and normalized school experience for all of our children. The issue was summarized in 7 basic categories: attendance, knowledge, participation, acceptance, discrimination, safety, health-related support. The conclusion of this research showed that this situation requires interdisciplinary and intersector measures between health services and educational environments in order to articulate a comprehensive approach focused on children's clinical needs. So not to boggle your mind with all of this in particular, but I did want to quote that directly from the article, because you as a parent, you are the key to advocating for this comprehensive approach that our children need in education. So today we are addressing that, and we have 2 amazing panelists to talk with today about that. The first is Laura Hennigan, who lives in Fairfield, Connecticut, and has been an attorney admitted in New York and Connecticut since 1995. Her early practice was happily in real estate and then as in-house contract counsel at a corporation. After her son was diagnosed at 3 with Asperger's syndrome and subsequently with severe learning disabilities, she stayed home and engaged in parental whirlwind of OT, PT, speech therapies, IEPs, along with raising 2 additional children. What a superhero, right? We're all used to that whirlwind of therapies and diagnosis. Laura personally saw the impact on a child when there was a zealous advocate involved and decided to go back to the practice of law, helping other families navigate special education. Here, she has found her passion and recognizes the life-changing impact on the entire family when a child can be educated in a way that addresses their unique variabilities. So quick little disclaimer, Laura is an attorney. She is not providing individual legal advice to any of us here today. She is speaking in general terms. So should you have a question at all about a legal issue, we recommend that you consult an attorney in your state and experience that has this law education behind them. So welcome, Laura. We're excited to have you. We're also here with Nikki McIntosh, who's the creator and founder of Rare Mamas, a resource, community, and podcast for mothers of children diagnosed with rare diseases. Nikki's mission is to offer the type of help and hope she so desperately craved when her son was newly diagnosed with a rare disease. At a high time in her career, Nikki's son Miles was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, a degenerative neuromuscular disease. Thrust into the rare disease world and spinning with doctor's appointments, therapies, and caregiving, she left her career behind to take care of her son full time as his condition necessitated. Nikki has immersed herself in the world of SMA and rare diseases and has become a fierce advocate for these communities. Through interviews, podcasts, speaking, and writing, she sheds light on the challenges parents face while raising children with a rare disease and provides encouragement and support to these families. Welcome, Nikki. Welcome to you both. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for having us.
Laura, I'm going to start with you. We all got
Okay.
together, and in our initial conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about what each of you were most passionate about when it comes to this particular topic. And you had initially talked about the importance of inclusive environments. So I just want to invite, kind of in an open way, for you to talk more about that importance and for our children in school, what that means to you, and what is it that the parents listening today really need to know about this topic.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here. I do have 3 dogs roaming around, so I'm sorry if they're disrupting anybody, but they should settle down. So I am a special education attorney, and I know you're all here because you have a connection to a child with a rare disorder. And I just want to give you a quick word on the law. So the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or we call it the IDEA, requires that students learn in the least restrictive environment. What that means is spending as much time with non-disabled peers as possible. Now, when I say disabled, the laws that I'm here to speak about are considered disability laws. I know a lot of you are dealing with diseases and disorders, and those are medical terms. So when I'm referring to a disability, it's really a matter of legal term versus medical term. But it's important for you to know that your child doesn't automatically qualify as a student with a disability unless the necessary criteria are met. And under the IDEA, there are 13 categories as to what constitutes a disability. If that doesn't work, don't panic though. There's Section 504 of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which allows accommodations and modifications for students with disabilities, which they define as a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more major areas of life. So that's a pretty broad description, because a major activity of life is breathing, walking, seeing, hearing, any of those activities. So now inclusion, in the world of special education, inclusion means the opportunity for students with disabilities to learn besides their non-disabled peers in a general education setting. That's what's known as the least restrictive environment, or we call it the LRE. It's a very big area of acronyms, like I'm sure you're all used to. So focusing on the child's abilities, not their disabilities, is a core. And the benefit is really widespread as the non-disabled peers are exposed to students with different talents, different personalities, and different needs. So, and you think about it, the real world is not segregated by disabilities and non-disabilities. So all students need to learn how to navigate with confidence in an inclusive environment that includes all of these different types of people. So studies have really shown that inclusion is beneficial to all, both short and long term. A particular study I can refer to, because I hate to say there are studies and then not give you something. There was one completed by the Harvard Graduate School of Education in August 2016. And the benefits to the students considered disabled were they had stronger development of reading and math skills. They had a higher percentage of post-secondary education, so attending college or another type of post-elementary education. They were more employable and more often living independently. And one specific is special education students also are less absent. They want to come to school more. Benefits to teachers and administrators too are seen. They have now the necessity of developing the ability to support the strengths and variabilities. I don't say weaknesses, I try to say variabilities of every student. So they've got to learn how to teach to different students in different ways. And that can really develop some strengths in teaching. And research shows that non-disabled peers, so the students without any of the disabilities, or at least any identified disabilities, educated in an included classroom, develop less prejudicial views and tend to be more accepting of others. And we all want that. A popular approach, which some of you may have heard of, is called universal design for learning. And hopefully this will become more and more widespread. And the concept is that you're able to provide several means of representation, action, expression, and multiple means of engagement, meaning you do something in many different ways that can cover many different abilities. So all students can learn from a learning style. So it's using manipulatives, it's using audio, it's using video, it's using whatever might touch all children. So where traditionally you might see students removed from a classroom for related services like speech therapy, inclusion would bring the speech therapist into the class, and all the students would get to benefit from that person being present. So, what does this really look like? This looks like your child's belongings are in the general education classroom, not in another location, and then they join in. They're in a classroom with peers of the same age. The general education teacher knows your child, knows their name, knows their abilities. Your child participates in all of the field trips and the recitals and the special events, and they know their classmates by name and by sight. They're not just kids that they see at lunch or at specials. So if you're asking yourself, how do I make sure my child's included? Share information with everyone who educates your child. And I think we'll talk more about this later in some of the questions, but not only how the rare disorder may affect them, but their strengths and their likes and their dislikes. Because as I said, the teacher needs to know the student. And when I say the teacher, I mean down to anyone who has an impact on your child during the day. So the music teacher, the PE teacher, the librarian, potentially the cafeteria personnel, all of these people will have things that they need to know. And it's really important that you keep open lines of communication with your teacher and your child. What's working, what isn't working, what part of the day are you enjoying, is there any part that gives you challenges, and offer feedback to both. And then walk the walk. I'm sure all of you are used to a language for children with rare disorders, and using the inclusive language and looking for inclusive solutions will help the problem. So that's kind of my couple of minutes on inclusion.
Thank you. That's extremely informative and takes an approach that not all of us are seeing in the classrooms currently with our children. Thank you for also defining the importance of making sure that we check off the right things and, to be assessed properly in the beginning. And that can be tricky, especially for people who have invisible diseases, people who don't even have a diagnosis yet. That can be very challenging for us. But one of the things that kind of leads us to that place is recognizing needs. And I know we talked about that. And I love the way you put the importance of defining needs well first. Could you touch on that for us a little bit?
Sure. So why is it important to define a child's needs? The definition of special education in the federal law is specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. So these include skills that are not only academic, but physical skills, motor skills, emotional skills, social behavior, executive functioning, the list goes on and on. I would think this is of the utmost importance when your child has a rare disorder and there may be things that are unique to your child that have to be addressed. So, we like to say that needs define goals and goals define services. So you determine what the child's needs are, you use those to determine what the goals are in the official documentation for special education, and then those drive what the services will be.
Yes, I love that. And that was the experience I had with my daughter as well, and looking at everything from a holistic perspective. So when we were looking at needs, it wasn't just about the importance of, how is she met in the classroom especially when she was younger and she had some physical disabilities. Can she have the right seat in the right place in the classroom? But also, what was her socio-emotional development doing? What was her mental, psychological development doing? And it didn't have to necessarily be in a place where she was deficient or there was a deficit that could be measured because of her disability, but because of how she was adapting, and so there was kind of this primary and then secondary level of the need to advocate for her. So I want to
And I
move
think that's
into
where, I'm
some
sorry.
work with, yeah. No, go ahead, please.
No, I think that's where it's important for people to remember that if you don't fit within the 13 defined categories of the IDEA, there are still plenty of options, and the options are the accommodations and modifications, which is what you're talking about, the preferential seating or extra time or those things that might benefit a child who doesn't have one of the named disabilities but has needs that need to be fulfilled.
And the key component I have found as a parent is kind of what you're talking about, being that parent in the room that knows the right questions to ask, that knows how to effectively advocate. Because we don't know the team that we're meeting. And while the team is there to assess things, if we're not a part of that team, then the assessment can be off. And so I want to pivot over here to Nikki if we can. Hi, Nikki. Thank you for
Hi
joining
there.
us.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yes. Time to jump into this conversation
All
because I've
right,
seen
I'm
you
ready.
nodding and I know you've got a lot to say about this too. So being an effective advocate, it's not just being at the table, but it's being at the table with the right mindset, with the right questions, with the right understanding of your child. So talk to me about what your experience has been and what you know about this.
Would love to. Thanks, Deb. Yes, as you said, being an effective advocate, it makes all the difference. So when I really think about it and trying to cull it down to several things that I think that you could take away from this, I think there are really three key components to effective advocating that I like to highlight. So they are being a collaborative member of the team, educating ourselves so that we can educate others, and then communicating effectively. So let's start with being a collaborative member of the team. I think it's first important that we understand that we as parents are essential members of our child's education team. We're our child's first and best advocate, and we know our child's best. So we have valuable insight to contribute. So our role is to represent our child, speak on their behalf, knowing what only we as parents can know. And the good news is that school districts want us to be involved. They want us to be an involved member of the team. It's welcomed. So I think it's just really important to kind of have this in our mindset to go in knowing that this is our role. We are a welcomed, instrumental, essential part of our child's educational team. So one of the ways we can be a valuable team member is by first educating ourselves as best we can about our child's condition and their needs. And the truth is that most often we as parents, we don't understand necessarily all the ins and outs of special education. So we might not understand the terms and the procedures, the laws. The special education is most likely not our area of expertise, but we are the experts of our child. And that's what we can bring to the table. And that is a very vital piece. So, because we are dealing with rare diseases, it's common to find that our child's school district may not be familiar with our child's diagnosis and how it impacts their learning. So, really, it's our job as parents and advocates to inform and educate the school district as best we can. So, instead of assuming that the school district understands our child's conditions and their needs, or that through the assessment process, they'll be able to glean everything they need to know, we're going to make no assumptions. And instead, we're going to proactively provide them with the needed information. So, if it's at all possible, what I recommend is doing upfront research on the types of services, accommodations, modifications that are most often recommended for children with your child's type of disease. And I recognize that this puts kind of more legwork on us as parents. And I also know that it comes with a huge learning curve, just like all aspects of rare disease. And that's difficult because we already have so very little time. but I assure you that this is definitely worth the investment of your time. Gaining this type of knowledge is going to help you prepare for meetings and for these conversations with the school district, and it's going to help ensure that your child has what they need. So we're going to have to do some research up front so that we can go into these IEP meetings, these 504 meetings, armed with information. So where can we find this type of information? If there's a foundation or an organization for your child's disease, you can see what they recommend for services, for accommodations, for modifications. If you know other parents whose children have the same condition, you can talk to them to see what their children have in their plans or what they recommend or what's working for them. Or in cases when your child's diagnosis is ultra rare or there isn't a foundation or an organization, or you may not know other parents whose children have the same diagnosis, you can research some of the symptoms. For example, if your child's condition causes fatigue, you can research the types of accommodations and modifications that are made for students that have fatigue, whether it's assistive technology devices or permitting extra time for assignments and exams, alternative PE, things of this nature, etc. So even though this takes extra work on our part as parents, gaining this knowledge is really going to help us build our confidence in this area. And it's going to allow us to have these informed conversations and dialogue with the team. And I just feel like the more educated we can be stepping into these meetings, the better outcomes we're going to have coming out. So we have to do our homework, figure out what plans and services may be helpful for our child. And this is a great foundation to start these conversations. So now that you've educated yourself, the next thing is you can educate your team. And your goal is really twofold. You're going to want to help the school administration understand your child's condition, and you're going to want to help them understand how it affects your child's ability to access their education. So typically the school will do a full assessment on their own on your child, and then based on the findings of that assessment, they'll recommend plans and services. And we talked a little bit about earlier, it's all based on need, right? But the reality is that sometimes it might be difficult to get a full picture in an assessment. So there may be some information gaps, and this is where we as parents can come in. We can help fill in those gaps. We can lay out exactly what our child's dealing with, how it specifically affects their ability to learn from not only a mental aspect, but like we were saying, socio-emotional as well, physical. And this really allows the team to get a full picture of our child. Another thing I recommend is for parents to put together an actual documentation. The document can outline your child's condition and how it impacts their learning, implications for navigating their environment, social issues, emotional issues, types of equipment they use, if any, et cetera, et cetera. So, in addition to you providing this type of information, you can also request letters from your child's doctors, specialists, therapists, outlining, the information. So then it's coming from professionals and experts in the area. Basically any factual information you can provide is going to give your team the ammunition they need to really substantiate services. So help them help you. And this is really what I mean by making it a collaborative effort. It's just all parties working towards the same goal of making sure your child's needs are addressed. And the last component I want to cover that I think is really important is effective communication. If we truly want to be a collaborative member of the team and advocate effectively, then we need to be mindful of the way that we communicate with our school district. We have to keep in mind that this is the team that will be responsible for implementing the services and facilitating your child's education. So we don't want to make them our adversaries. We want to make them our allies. We want to make them partners. And the thing about advocating is, it's really a balance. If we don't speak up and we don't ask for what our child needs, we'll never know if we can get it. But on the other side, if we ask in a very adversarial way, we'll most likely find that we might not meet a lot of people on the other end who want to help someone that's adversarial. So we have to find the balance. And the best way I can explain how to do that is that we need to communicate um, in an assertive way, but in a diplomatic way. If we're shy, we definitely need to find our voice. If we're aggressive, we're going to need to find our diplomacy. And because the truth is, there may be times that we disagree with the assessment findings or the recommended services, or there may be times when we need to ask for more services, or when we need to speak up because the services and plans that were put in place aren't working. And I definitely believe this is our job as parents to advocate in these instances. But often these situations can well up all sorts of emotions within us, because we care so deeply about our child, and because we so desperately want them to have what they need. It can be upsetting when we feel they aren't getting it. But we're really going to have to take our emotions out of our advocacy and speak and act from a place of fact, not emotion. And this is difficult because, let's be honest, this is our children. It is emotional. This is an emotional topic. Um, but getting emotional can get in the way of getting our children what they need. So, as best we can, we need to keep our emotions out of it, speak from fact, speak from research, speak with the goal in mind. And that might mean taking a step back and asking ourselves, okay, what are the facts? What are the truths? What will help me build my case? What factual evidence can I provide that's going to help back up what my child needs? And we need to let this factual information empower us to ask for it. And we need to let this factual information be our mouthpiece. And because the truth is, we're going to be in constant communication. It's going to be continual communication with the school district as our child grows. And so if we truly want to serve our children, we have to communicate effectively with their team, and this will lead to more successful outcomes. So those are my tips on effective advocating.
Thanks, Nikki. And just so the audience knows, Nord has helped us create a downloadable for you that's going to have, a document that has a lot of these tips and tricks for you. So we're kind of doing the discussion part that we feel is more important to process. But a lot of the links that you need and the lists that you need and some tips that we can give you are all going to be in that document, so that you can just kind of sit back and take all this in and use that as a reference sheet resource for yourself when we're done with this. Nikki, your last point about how we communicate, if we can communicate effectively without being defensive, without emotions, that's really hard. So in our particular
Yes, it is.
yeah, it's been really hard in our particular situation. I've been involved in situations where we have had to become adversarial sometimes, and we've also been in school districts that have been the most accommodating, the most welcoming. I will say that probably the greatest challenge for my family was with invisible disabilities, with
Yes.
the invisible symptoms that were there. It was very hard for some teachers and some administrators to recognize, in spite of doctors' letters, et cetera, what was really needed for us. And so there were times that it was important to speak a little louder, but to still be kind, to still be direct, and taking the emotion out of it was a huge help to me. So I'm really glad you brought that up. One of, I think, the most challenging times for us as, caregiving warriors, right? Like the advocacy, we feel like we've put on armor in a lot of
Yes.
situations, whether it's to go find the diagnosis, or to protect ourselves from being, beaten down any further, to, advocating at school and putting on our superhero cape and just letting our kids feel loved and whatever normal is for them. So we put that armor on so easily, and sometimes it's hard to remember where we need it and where we need to not use it. So your tips are very helpful in that regard. I think in our rare disease community, and I know for our advocacy group and who we help, one of the hardest points is when we know there's something wrong, but the diagnosis isn't there yet. Can you speak a little bit about how that advocacy might need to look different at that roundtable discussion, creating a 504 or IEP plan without a diagnosis, but the needs are evident?
Yeah, and I think that's, exactly where some of these tips are going to come into play, where it is a little bit more on us than as parents. We're going to have to Um, I think really start documenting. I think that's how we can help. Really start documenting what we see without a diagnosis, right? That has, best care practices and things of this nature. It's going to be a little bit more on us to start uh, basically coming up with our own kind of roadmap to helping our team understand our child, documenting behaviors that they go through, documenting their illnesses, the side effects, things of this nature, so that you can start seeing patterns over time. And you can kind of start looking at these different patterns and then kind of coming to some conclusions to say, okay, this is what I've tracked over time. This is what I've seen. This is what has helped. This is what has not, and then you kind of can use this documented information to help guide your team, because really, again, it's going to be on you to keep informing them. Um, and yes, if you can pull in any of the therapists and doctors who can just substantiate any of these things that you're seeing, that's going to definitely be helpful. But it's, again, this is one of those areas where it's going to be on you as parents to kind of be providing this information to the team.
Laura, it looked like you might have something to add to that.
Nikki hit on so many things that I completely agree with, and one of my favorite words is document. So there's a saying in probably more than special ed law that if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So when you are having these conversations with the school, whether they are being really collaborative or not, make sure the follow-up is in writing. And that might be as simple as you sending an email after saying, thank you for meeting with me today, and here's what I understood from our meeting. And that creates a record of what you believe happened. And then I just wanted to touch too on collaboration, because I find a lot of people think that I cannot imagine how overwhelming it is to have a child with a rare disorder and everything that you have to deal with for yourself and your family and your child. Then you're adding on to this layer, like trying to get services in school. And some people tend to think that bringing in an advocate or an attorney makes things less collaborative and more contentious. And just speaking from my own experience, I don't find that. And in some ways, it takes the emotional component away from the parent having to deal with it. And it puts it in another level of people talking about things from a non-emotional level, which can really be helpful because, I've had several attorneys who are clients who are crying and sobbing at their IEPs. I've cried at IEPs for my own children. It's your child. So it hits such emotions in you that the process can be collaborative, whether or not you have outside help, was just the point that I wanted to make.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd love to
And
touch on that too.
go for it.
Yeah, that outside help can, like you said, I mean, that is especially when you feel like you've tried other avenues and things aren't working. An advocate can be one of your best resources, because they can speak on your behalf, and especially if you find somebody that is has relationships with your school district, with people within your team, the principals, teachers, coordinators, and if that person has a good reputation and have those relationships, they can really help you move the needle on where you're trying to get for what you're trying to get with for your child.
That's such a good point,
Wonderful. So you,
because the personnel are limited. There's only so many administrators in a school, and there's only so many attorneys that represent students, and there's only so many attorneys that represent the districts. So the community gets to know each other, and as Nikki said, you get to kind of know who's collaborative and how the different systems work, and it can really help you be more effective.
I know I've sat at some of those roundtable discussions over the many years. And initially, I remember feeling badly that, there were so many people around the table. You get everybody as a part of the conversation that is affected by your child in the way that they learn and that needs to accommodate your child. So different teachers, school psychologists, your intervention specialist, you have so many people around that table. And it can be daunting sometimes, but to recognize that you as the parent are part of that team and that they're all there for your child, and to recognize from their perspective, maybe sometimes they contribute something that you haven't thought of yet. It might be easy if you have a physical disability to recognize that, phys ed class needs to be adjusted, but that you weren't recognizing that something in another classroom might also need to be adjusted that you hadn't thought of, and that teacher's there to think of it with you. And that's a beautiful part of the collaboration. I think one of the questions that we get a lot that I would love, I think Laura mentioned she could address this, is about nutrition, meal planning. And that's something I've thrown my hands up in the air before myself when my child was young, because it doesn't seem to fit into the educational mold. Yet we have to plan for our special needs that our kids have when it comes to their nutrition and their meals. And how do you do this at school when you're not there with them? And how do you work that into, what their educational plan is?
Absolutely. You're so right. It's such an important piece. And, both the federal laws that I mentioned do sort of address this, because eating is a very important life skill. And there's some regulations for the National School Lunch Program that all require accommodation for kids who can't eat the meal as prepared because of a disability. Generally, this includes substitution of a food or a modification of the texture, are kind of the two most popular areas. And generally, schools have to have written documentation from a doctor as to what the issue is and what the substitution is and why it's necessary. Some requirements may differ based on whether your child is paying full price, and I hate to, bring that into it, but if your child is on a meal assistance plan or paying full price, the requirements of the school might be a little different. So you've got to always ask for your district's written policies on any issue. But in this issue, so you want to go to, the cafeteria manager or the superintendent and ask for the written policies the district has. And if you're being told something that is not in those written policies, that's your point of argument. Because even allergies may not qualify a student for a substitution unless a doctor notes that there's a reaction so severe it could be life-threatening. And that would qualify it as a disability. So decisions, if it doesn't qualify, decisions can still be made, and this is where collaboration comes in again, on a case-by-case basis. For those who have less severe but still severe reactions. So again, try to be collaborative and cooperative. And this goes back to including everyone on the team, which I said in the beginning. The food service manager needs to be involved in these decisions or requests, because they're the ones that are responsible for the budgeting, the preparing, and all of that. So including these people that are involved in the process is going to be really helpful for you. And just know that if a meal isn't offered to the general student population, generally it can't be required to be provided for a child with a disability. So your child needs breakfast every morning and they leave so early in the morning, they won't eat before they leave, but your school doesn't provide breakfast. The school's not necessarily required to if they don't provide it to everybody, but that's one of these case by case, somebody can work something out where you can have your child's needs met. And parents can't be charged for the cost of these modifications, because that goes back to my very first point about a free, appropriate public education based on the IDEA. So that includes, paying for things that other people are not paying for. So that's kind of, a very broad stroke on meal planning on some of the big areas. And it really comes down to the written policies that your district's going to have, and making sure that you've got those as your kind of armor, as we talked about.
Perfect. Listen, we only have a few more moments or minutes here together. So I want to give each of you an opportunity after this great conversation. You both have brought so many good things to think about. What are some closing thoughts you have about, this topic and what you think parents need to take away from this most? Nikki, let's start with you.
I would just want to leave you with a little encouragement. It may sound overwhelming, and like I said, we all, as rare disease parents, we have so much to learn, and this may feel like one more thing, but it really, if we do a little bit of legwork up front, it really can set our child up for success in the long term. It may seem like a lot at the beginning, But once we lay those foundations, lay the stage, it will get easier over time. So I just want to encourage you, you can do this. You're capable, you'll learn it. And I'm just rooting for you. I know you're going to be a great advocate for your kid.
Thanks, Nikki. Laura?
I think Nikki said it best, where you know your child better than anybody else in the room, at the table, in the school, and you know how your child is going to react to different things. So you are an equal part of the team, and you need to act like that, and you need to be treated like that. And I think those things are really important, especially coming off the last year and a half we have, where a lot of kids are missing services, maybe have regressed. It's a time to be a little bit even more aggressive in trying to make up some of the lost skills. And you have had this unique opportunity, I'll call it that, to see your child really up close and how their education works and where maybe things are not as what you thought they would be. So use that information and data, and to have a good program to go back to when the world returns to in person for everybody.